About to leave, already packing. Come with me, I'm not really asking. We'll get away to a place where we don't know. About to see the world in action, what we can be, life with no distractions. We'll get away, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free with me. Let's go, let's be free with Not looking back, eyes on the freeway, Bonnie and Clyde, a classic cliche. We're on the run, this is what we waited for. Take my hand, we'll make it somehow. We can't miss out. I'm done living life with the lights out. Die with my own doubts. Be free.
Hello. Now, as you can see, hello, I'm Duncan, and there's Anna, and we are also joined by Katie, who is currently in darkness. We're not. She was there a minute ago. She had appeared, and she's disappeared again. But I'm sure Katie will be joining us any moment now. Hi, Katie. She is here. Hang on, I will just bear with us a second. Oh, this is really slick. Here we go. Hey! There we go. Hi, Katie.
Hello.
Right. Hello. So, day before the exam, always always I can see with lots of the comments, people think, oh no, so either hey, I'm ready for it, or worried about it, or whatever. This is your opportunity to ask us some questions, have a bit of a chat. We'll talk through what the paper's like, what the write ourselves some of the questions, answer your questions. We're going to stick with education for the first half of the session. We'll look at, so in terms of technique, that's the 4, 6, 10, and 30 markers, and content, anything that you might be concerned about in relation to education. And then we'll switch to methods and theory for the last part, including the methods in context type thing. Quite a lot of people asking, how long's it going to be? How long's a piece of string? No, we are going to have a cut-off period, so hopefully it'll be a little bit shorter than this, but we will not go beyond the hour. So at 6 o'clock, we will, even if you've still got some questions going, we will sign off at that point. So we will try and get all your questions answered before then. Okay.
And
so
Craig's okay, by the way. They're a bit worried about where Craig is. Craig's fine, guys. He's just
busy. He's busy.
I'm not quite sure. Yeah, he'll be back next week. Don't worry.
He
Paper
will.
2, Craig will be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Lots of people saying, "What's the paper on?" Anyone know? I'll start with this: the very obvious thing that we don't know what's on the paper. You don't know what's on the paper. We know it's education, research, and theory and methods. But anyone saying online, and people do, that they know what's on the questions, they don't. If they did know, they wouldn't be allowed to tell you. So just don't go into panics from sort of rumours and things that you see spreading around online. If there's anything that anyone says and you think, oh, I wouldn't like a question on that, it's worth thinking, oh, well, do I need to do a bit more late minute looking at that? Because obviously they could ask any of those topics, but we don't know exactly what they get. We don't know what they're going to ask. It could be anything on the spec. Okay, I am going to select a few questions that people have got, and we're going to get started.
There's an important one there from Anna Bassi about mentioning the item in the 10 and the 30 marker. She's asking how many times, do you need to mention the item in the 10 and the 30? I think that's a good one to clear up.
Okay. Who wants to kick us off on that one? Anna, you spotted the question.
I started it. I'll finish it.
Absolutely.
So in the 10 marker, the item is essentially the two hooks that you need to talk about, one for each paragraph. So the 10 marker, there'll be 3 sentences. One of them simply repeats the question. So you want to find that sentence first, maybe put brackets around it. And then the other 2 sentences are your hooks, and they need to be in each paragraph. With the 30 marker, you don't actually have to explicitly mention the item at all. The item is there to help you. So it will guide you as to what they're looking for in the answer and give you some hints. But there's nothing in the mark scheme that says that you have to explicitly quote the item in the 30 marker. It's just there as a kind of guide and a prompt.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, absolutely. Would agree totally with that. Have you got anything to add, Katie? Or I think Katie's possibly still having a little bit of trouble with the connection.
I don't know if I'm lagging or not today. Am I lagging? Or my connection good? I'm not sure.
Visually, you're lagging, but we can hear you. So.
Oh, there we go. Well, that's the most important thing, hey. So yeah, I mean, I'd agree exactly. There's nothing really to add. Obviously, what I would say is, use it as a prompt. That's the key thing for the 30 marker.
Yeah. What you sometimes see people doing with the 30 marker is just using the item, and that's a bit too limited. So I do think, it's using the item and your own knowledge for the 30 marker. So do go a bit beyond the item, but it's a good thing to get you thinking. Suggest some ideas. It would be strange not to use it because it's there to help you, but don't feel bound by it for the 30 marker. But the 10 marker, both points from the item. Okay, we've got a lot of questions coming through. Some same people asking the same question over and over again. If there are quite a few globalization and policy ones, we'll get to that. Don't worry. If you have got a question to ask, I will. Hopefully I'll spot it. But if you don't keep asking the same question again and again too quickly, because then we miss other people's questions. So if we haven't spotted it, feel free to ask it again in a bit. But don't spam us with it if that's all right.
Because we were going to start with education, should we say questions? There's quite a lot of questions about answering the question, like intros, conclusions, paragraphs. Yeah. Should we save that for the end? Should we do the content first, and then anything that's related to?
That's a good idea, Anna. Yeah. Let's have a little bit of time on content, and then we'll do a bit of time on structure, and then we'll go on to research methods. Okay, so we'll do content for education, structure for education, then we'll move on to research methods and theory. So we've got, what are the evaluations for material deprivation? So you mean if you're saying that one of the causes for perhaps differential educational achievement by social classes is material deprivation, how could you evaluate that? And remember, you don't have to criticise it. If you think that's true, there are other ways that you can evaluate it. But there are things you could suggest as alternatives or as limitations of it, aren't there? I mean, does anyone want to take that? What kind of, if you're making a paragraph about material deprivation and educational achievement?
I mean, I don't mind.
Yeah, go on, Kate. Go for it, Katie.
I'd go for compensatory policies. Obviously, the ways to mitigate against that. That would be the sort of classic go-to. But obviously, like you said, it can be evidence. So obviously, you can use evidence of that, which is obviously how it's measured is free school meals, and students disproportionately underachieve those who are on free school meals. And obviously, Sutton Trust has done a lot of research on that. I appreciate that at this stage you don't want to be adding stuff to your knowledge bank that you're not fully aware of, so don't start Googling at this stage. But there's the stuff that I'm sure your teachers has gone over with you, but compensatory policies are normally my sort of go-to with that one as evidence to support it, to go against mitigating against it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so a couple of people saying the audio's lagging. I'm sorry about that. If it is, might be because there's lots of you watching. I don't know what's causing a lag in the audio, but hopefully it'll be okay. Lots and lots of people are asking quite broad questions, which obviously I will try and address, but obviously, basically everything about globalization or everything about privatization, we're not, we could spend a whole hour on that.
Angel has a good question, which was like, what are the best policies to remember? I mean, there are some essential ones, I'd say. That was Angel, just went a little bit before.
I'm sure.
Right. She said,
what are the best?
what are the best policies to remember?
Got it. Okay.
I think it's good because there are some kind of essential things, like the Education Reform Act 1988, I would say is pretty essential to know the policies in there. So open enrollment, formula funding, league tables, national curriculum. It's essential, I'd say, to know some policies on equality, like compensatory policies, maybe some of the new Labour ones. And then some policies that are about how education prepares us for work or meets the needs of the economy. I think you need to make sure you've got some policies for marketization and raising standards, some policies where you could say they've created equality and reduced inequality, like both ways, and then maybe some preparing for the economy type policies, I'd say. I don't know if Katie wants to add any.
Yeah, I mean, I'm very cautious of where we are in the day, as it is 9 minutes past 5.
Yeah, don't want anyone panicking about what they need to learn for tomorrow. Absolutely.
I would definitely echo exactly, like, ideally 3, 4, 5. I don't know, 3 or 4 maybe policies for each one under each sort of bracket. But maybe I'd add to that with obviously policies that have been affected by globalization, which I know has been cropped up. So I know you'll talk about that later. Maybe policies that have brought out, which I know was a question in the past, so sort of selection and choice. And so yeah, I mean, there's sort of like class, gender, ethnicity, globalization, work, selection, choice. And there was one other one I was thinking of in my head, but it's got privatization, obviously, as well.
Yeah.
And obviously sense of community. But a lot of those will go over more than one. Do you know what I mean? So it's not a case of remembering more policies. It's that some of those policies will sit into more than one box. Like particularly, as said the ERA, that those policies within that sit across more than one box.
Yeah. If you take something like the national curriculum, it was designed for a couple of reasons, wasn't it? Part of it was to help marketization, so everyone's learning the same thing so you can compare them, and that's where we tend to talk about it. But it also, by making sure everyone's learning the same thing, it had other impacts, didn't it? Like on equality, because of boys and girls being taught the same curriculum, and rather than say the desegregation of the curriculum in that way. So yeah, don't need to know hundreds of policies, just think about what was their intention and then did they succeed. That's the kind of that's likely what to be the sort of focus of the question, rather than when it was and who brought it in and that kind of thing, which we learn is useful extra knowledge, but the focus is likely to be what was its purpose. And
someone asked if they need sociologists, or are the policies enough? I mean, the policies in themselves count as evidence, like like a sociologist's name would. There are a few handy ones if you're evaluating them, like Gerwitz or Gerwitz or Ball or Gerwitz or Ball or like Bartlett or Gilborn and Udell. But
absolutely.
Yeah.
Now the one I spotted on that was rather than is policy enough for a names, actually is theory enough for a names necessary. I wondered with that, are you saying if you like remember a concept, I'll say remember something like Nike identities, but you can't remember who said it, is that going to be a major impact on your answer? I think that might be where you're going for it. Is it, you're basically saying, is it okay to say Marxists say this rather than Althusser says this? And obviously, I'll give a sort of my first answer, and then you two add to it. Would be all knowledge is good. So if you know something, share that knowledge, and that's going to be racking up AO1. Concepts are more important than names. So if you can remember a concept and you can't remember who said it, tell us about it. Yeah, put it on there. You will get credit for that concept. And I would say if you think you remember who said it, I'd go for it and have a go, because it's marked positively. You'll still get credited for the concept, and you might have remembered who said it rightly. Hopefully you did, and so I'd go for it. But no, don't panic about names. Big long lists of names isn't the key to a high mark. It's analysis and evaluation and explanation, use of sociological concepts is the key. Yeah. But if you do know the names, do them.
Someone just asked if we need dates for the policies. I mean, you don't necessarily need dates for the policies, but you kind of need to know the order that they came, if you know what I mean. So you need a little bit of context in terms of what was more recent and what came before it, because some of the policies are trying to adjust target problems that were caused by previous policy. So you kind of need to know a little bit more the chronological order, but you don't need to know the actual date. You won't get marks in terms of the actual dates or lose marks, but you kind of need to know that the tripartite system is from a long time ago.
Yes.
And that the kind of I don't know, free schools is a more recent policy type thing. Like you need a bit of context like that, otherwise you might write things that are inaccurate.
Yeah. I see a few people asking about, are we going to be talking about theory and methods as well? Yeah, later on in the session we'll move on to theory and methods. A couple of people asking, are we going to be doing like the usual sort of PowerPoint activities type thing for this one? No, today's one is very much a kind of a chat. We're going to try and answer your questions in preparation for the exam. We will be doing some more PowerPoint style ones when it's not the night before the exam. But we tend to think, like, if we ask a load of questions and you're sitting there thinking, I don't know the answers to these, that's not a very encouraging thing the night before the exam. So this is more for answering your questions and hopefully trying to allay some concerns, and also fill in a few gaps and things. There's loads and loads of questions coming in. It's trying to pick out the right ones.
Gunbean just asked a good question. I think that's just gone up about is marketization just Margaret Thatcher's policies, or does it relate to policies that came up? Yeah, that probably follows on a bit from what we were talking about.
Yeah, so that's because we were saying about it's a lot of the time it's about the purpose of the policies, isn't it? And so marketization is about the purpose of the policy, not necessarily who brought it in, although it's often associated with Conservative governments and the new right. But it was the intention of the policy to create an education market, to add more choice, to give parents more choice, more competition between schools. So quite a lot of policies do that, don't they? Not just Thatcher era ones. I mean, sorry, I'm chatting. You two take it from there. But no, not just Thatcher. Yeah. Not just Thatcher. Yeah.
No, I mean, obviously a lot of those policies were brought in, weren't they, under Thatcher, but they've not been removed by the sort of new Labour government that followed, which suggests that they sort of either supported them or to some degree. And obviously this is more not to do so much with marketisation, but obviously more to do with privatisation and academisation, which is this idea that actually that was brought in under New Labour. So I think there's sort of this idea you've got to think, well, what policies are in sequence and which ones are still around, and what, like Anna said, like which ones have been sort of potentially built upon by like the following governments. But really it's just knowing the sequence in which they've come in and really what they've aimed to do, and really the strengths and limitations with it. How far have they been effective in doing what they've said they're going to do? Because that's where most of your marks are going to come from, is analysis. It's not just telling us a list of policies and what they did. It's going to be a debate, and that's the thing that's going to give you marks. Otherwise it would just be a list, wouldn't it? So it's making sure you do something with them. Yeah,
absolutely. Okay, I've seen this one a couple of times, so we'll come to this one next. And actually, there's quite a lot you could say for this, isn't there? So if you were linking education policy to needs of the economy, if that came up in a question, it's quite a nice potential 10 marker or something like that. Would be like apply and analyse 2 ways that education policies help the needs of the economy, or something like that. But it could come up in any type of question, couldn't it? What sorts of connections could we make between policy and the economy? I can think of a few, but I'll go to you two first. Yeah. What do you reckon?
Who's going first? Shall I go first?
I mean, I don't
go on. Go for it, Anna. Go on, Anna. Yeah.
Okay, so basically when we say that policies meet the needs of the economy, that basically means creating skilled workers that have the skills needed for what our economy needs today. So most of the policies, although you've got some explicit ones, so like vocational education policies, they are the ones that kind of literally would prepare workers for the economies, because they're trying to teach skills that for jobs that our economy needs, that are important. So in our UK economy at the moment, the shortage areas are health and social care and construction. So they've made amendments to apprenticeships to get more of those people qualified. So you've got kind of ways that it literally meets the needs of the economy, like creating vocational qualifications, but also anything that's to do with raising standards, which could be your marketization policies, would also help meet the needs of the economy, because it's going to create potentially workers that are more skilled, more qualified, have a higher level of knowledge or higher grades for literacy and numeracy, for example. So things like raising the school leaving age, or the national curriculum making it compulsory to do English and maths and science till 16, means everyone's learning those subjects to an older age, and therefore they've got a better, more sophisticated knowledge of them. So that's what we mean. It's anything that's going to prepare a worker to be clever and skilled and have qualifications, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
Yeah. Yeah. Most policies will probably have the needs of the economy in mind, for in at least to some extent. I suppose some are looking at other purposes, aren't they? Like values and that sort of thing, like British values or something. But yeah.
But then you could even make a sort of, I mean, like quite a loose link, but you could say that obviously this idea that people working together and working sort of globally and multiculturalism and that idea.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the thing is, it's I'd rather at this stage learning new stuff. It's thinking about the policies you already know, and then just thinking maybe just a light revision, thinking how do they meet the needs of the economy? Because you've probably covered a lot of policies already, and though that might not be their main goal, they probably have done that anyhow, because ultimately the government doesn't want unemployed people. Yeah.
Anything raising standards is for the economy. Anything you've linked with globalization, we've got loads of questions about that. It's talking about skills for the global economy, equipping people for the global economy, and then obviously vocational education and stuff like that you could bring in. So there's lots and lots.
Yeah, and Abby's just asked a good question as well about linking theory to it, and then you can potentially link theories. So she said, can you link correspondence principle? So yeah, things like Marxism, like Bowles and Gintis, or Davis and Moore from functionalism, like role allocation. Like you could link some theory into the fact that that's the role of education, is to create workers or train workers or whatever. So yeah, definitely, like you could bring the two together.
Okay, lots and lots of people have been asking questions in relation to globalization, and I feel we probably ought to do a couple of them. What I will say at this point is we don't know what questions are going to come up, and every year for the last, I can't remember how long it's been, around about this time, suddenly everyone's been absolutely certain the 30 mark is going to be about globalization. It hasn't been yet. It could be, you could get a question about globalization, but that, equally, it's no more likely than any other topic to come up as the 30 mark question. But yes, you could get a 30 mark on globalization and policy. If you get a question about globalization, it's likely to relate to policy, and that's where I'm seeing some of the other questions go. How does globalization impact on education policies? Which could be a question, could be a 10 mark, and no reason to assume it would be a 30 mark, wherever it might come. So yeah, how does globalization impact on education policies? Using stuff that they know, policies that they know. We don't want to cause any night before panics.
Well, I think you mentioned already some of them already, Anna. So we've talked about obviously this idea of a global market, a global economy. So again, repeating ourselves again with the national curriculum and a core subjects that you have to be taught that make us transferable. Again, raising standards, the whole thing with the PISA rankings and the league tables is about marketing not as only to ourselves, to parents through parentocracy, but to TNCs to make us attractive for foreign investors. That's what's measuring the success of a country. So those students, again, are going to be employable for foreign investors or to go abroad, equally for students to come here and be educated as well. You've got things like, I'll just mention one more, but like I mentioned already, which is like British values, obviously with multiculturalism. You've got that idea where we need to be aware of other people from other cultures and thinking about how we teach our curriculum to meet that. So obviously things like British values, but obviously the PSHE curriculum. You could bring in Prevent, but obviously that's quite easily evaluated as well. I'm going to stop talking because I could probably list some more. But again, it's at this stage thinking about globalisation and stuff that you already know rather than stuff that's new. I'll hand over to someone else.
Have you got anything to add on that, Anna? I've probably got one thing,
I was
but
just going to say, but yeah, just going from the Katie's last point, just, yeah, the impact, migration is obviously a big part of globalization. So any policies that are to do with having a like diverse student body, ethnic minorities in the education system,
yeah,
providing English as an additional language support, providing home language GCSEs, foreign language
yeah,
GCSEs, things like Black History Month, just like any multicultural education initiatives. And
yeah,
then the kind of counter to it, there's the response of, let's say, Michael Gove and the coalition kind of going back against the multiculturalism and trying to make the curriculum more British as a response, which is a kind of that maybe their negative perception of the impact of globalization has led them to do that kind of thing. So you've
yeah. Which
got,
might,
so don't forget, you've got all that migration,
yeah.
impact of migration stuff in there as well.
I mean, just that's sort of related to what I was going to say. Is that if one way to think about it, and this is because globalization comes up in other topics as well, and it's a good starting point when you think about globalization when it comes to, can you think of a few of the features of globalization? So yeah, migration's one, global trade and economics, so competing between on a global economy rather than a national economy is another. You know, greater cultural awareness of the world is another. So if you think about some of the features of globalization, then think, can I link those
and
to
technology as well,
policy?
obviously. So the rise
Yeah,
in
technology, media,
media.
yeah,
I think you bring in
new
maybe
media.
sort of like privatization. I was thinking there with sort of the
Yeah,
outsourcing to big companies, and
Yeah.
obviously I don't know if you've obviously mentioned. I know Anna did earlier about free schools,
like
and
borrowing
obviously
policies from other countries.
yeah,
Yeah,
foreign policies for other countries. So obviously the free schools and obviously academies came from America. But things
yeah,
like, I mean, you might have experienced Singapore maths when you were younger, or it might be things like heuristic play in primary school. So a lot of those have come from other countries, and obviously there's limitations with that, which I think we've got basic evaluational points there. So I don't know if someone else wants to.
no, that. Yeah, but I mean
Yeah.
that's all sounding good. I don't know if you want to add anything more to
Just,
evaluation. I mean, as it of the thing with evaluation, and there's lots of questions about evaluation, and they're more for structure, and we'll come to that later. Well, not structure, but technique, and we'll come to that later. But remember, when you're evaluating, it's what depends what the question is, doesn't it? It depends what the question is. If you're being asked, how you'd evaluate a point would very much depend on what you've been asked, rather than like a kind of what's an evaluation of globalization necessarily. It would be like maybe you'd be evaluating how effective the policy's been, whether that was the main thing that drove that policy. So it just depends what you've been asked, really.
yeah. If we think about the ideas we just spoke about, like, for example, so with the migration stuff, you've got the idea that the curriculum became more multicultural, but then we had that slight kind of reverse with the curriculum reform in 2015, where it's been argued to be more ethnocentric now. So that's, by contrasting that, that's a way of evaluating the idea. Also, this stuff about raising standards and like things like the international league tables, that's actually been successful because our rankings in those international league tables have now gone up quite considerably. So you could say that those policies have been successful because now we've improved our ranking in the international league tables. So I think it's just, it is looking at the impact of the policies. Has it been positive? Has it been negative? Has it achieved what it was supposed to achieve? Has it had a different impact? So I think go through the things you know about globalization, maybe today, like little brainstorm, and then just for each of them, just think, okay, do I know what the impact is for each of them? And then that's like your evaluation and analysis.
Yeah. I'll have a couple more on, just a couple bits more on education content, and then we'll have a little bit on the more, do you have to evaluate? Obviously, we'll have various questions about that kind of thing, how many paragraphs and
Yeah,
that kind of thing.
structure
We'll come
and
on, we'll
essay.
structure stuff. We'll do that in a minute, but we'll just have a couple more things. I don't want to, my worry is sometimes if you put stuff on the thing and it just causes panic. But obviously we mentioned privatization before, and quite a few people have asked about privatization. And one of the very first questions we got was, could someone define exogenous and endogenous privatization? And obviously I don't want anyone, because there is a chance someone might look at that and think, well, I've not come across that, and I don't want to see anyone typing "I'm cooked," but because you won't be asked directly, it won't be like define this term, because that's not the sort of questions that you get. So it's the sort of thing you could bring in to a question about privatization. It's two different ways in which the education system could be said to be privatized, and you'd quite likely discuss the sorts of things without necessarily using those terms. But obviously if you do know the key terms, it's good to use it. So exo suggests outside, endo suggests inside, so that's your kind of clue to try and remember what it is. So exogenous would be like outsourcing to different private companies like Choose to You or whoever to produce services, or like things like having McDonald's school dinners being produced by McDonald's. That doesn't happen, does it? But whoever it might be. It did happen at some point in the 80s. I'm sure that did happen. I remember it. I remember hearing that at one point, but it's not usual now, is it?
Not usual. I think you've got Apple schools, haven't you, and Google schools and things like that as well. So
all that kind of thing.
Yeah, the outsourcing, and obviously like academization as well. So
yeah, and then endogenous is more like the school. It's more like marketization, really. It's the school behaving in the manner of a private company. Yeah, acting like. Although with academization, the two kind of end up merging a little bit, don't they? So they when these terms, when these terms came out, it was very much, there was that sort of distinction was easier to make than it is today, because obviously
there was a 10 marker
lot of schools are
a few
private
years
companies.
ago. Yeah, there was a 10 marker a few years ago where one hook, the line reflected endogenous, and the other hook, the line reflected exogenous. So they have done that as a 10 before. So people are saying, could this be 4, 6? I mean, probably not. Like the same 10 wouldn't probably come up again. Maybe a 4 or 6, I don't know. But it's something they've done, but they didn't use the terminology exogenous and endogenous. It's just that the definitions were there, but not the terms.
Yeah, okay. And there was just one more on content, and then we will move on to the structurally type stuff, and then methods in context and theory. Don't worry. We've got another marketization one, just quickly. Can you discuss how marketization impacts education and some policies or theories that link to this? It's quite a, we've already talked about what sort of policies, haven't we? I think a bit earlier on when we were saying it's not just the Thatcher ones, but it's anything that leads to choice. Actually, have we done this already? Because we had evaluations for it as well, didn't we? We were saying about Bolbo and Gewurtz and Diane Ray. I think, it's have a look. If you missed us talking about that before, you can look back to that one. Sorry, I thought that was a new one. And then just as I was reading it, I think we've pretty much talked about it. In terms of theory, marketization policies are supported by the new right. So if you want to bring some theory into it, new right sociologists support marketization. You could use something like Chubb and Moe, looking at a voucher system proposing a voucher system for schools in the US. And then most of the other perspectives at least have some criticisms of marketization, and perhaps particularly sort of Marxist or neo-Marxist or social democrat type criticism. Yeah.
Does anyone? Ben keeps asking about this Hammy House study. What is that?
I was hoping no one was going to ask, because I don't know.
He's asked it lots and lots of times, but I don't think it's that important, Ben, because none of us know what it is, so I wouldn't worry about that one.
No,
it might be an in-joke. It might be an in-joke. I think it might be an in-joke, maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think most of them have come up. I think the most concerns about policy. I did see a few around feminism. I don't know if you've got, but it's gone now because they've. But
right.
There was a sort of question about feminism and the theories view, because obviously we've talked about theories view. We spent a lot of time talking about globalization and policies, but obviously last year there was a question around the Marxist view.
Marxism, there was, wasn't there?
Yeah.
Oh yeah. So actually, I saw a question earlier, and I thought I'd favorited it, and then I couldn't find it, which was saying, could you only in terms of theory, could you only be asked about functionalism and Marxism, or could you be asked about other theories as well? The spec, when it talks about the role of education, focuses on. Just remind me if I'm wrong about this, but it focuses on functionalism, Marxism, and a bit on New Right as well. And then the feminism stuff tended to come in later in the kind of relationships and processes within schools, and also differential achievement by gender,
and gender subject choices as well.
Subject gender choice, identity formation, that kind of thing. But of course, the idea that maybe one of if as soon as you talk about one of the roles being socialization, we think about that functionalism, Marxism, but it's quite easy to bring in feminism as well. Is it part of the role of the education system is to reinforce the patriarchy and things like that? I don't think you get a question directly on it, but
No, but it's a good view to bring in, especially on there's a couple of previous questions about norms and values, meritocracy, where you could bring in all that stuff on gender and feminism, and it's going to give you another dimension to your answer, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, so there's no No problem with it being there at all. Okay, we've had lots of questions about sorry, there have been quite a few about roles and relationships and processes as well, so I'll just quickly mention that. A couple of people say, because we haven't talked about that, we've mostly talked about policy stuff. Relationships and processes you do know about, so don't, you might see those words and think, oh, is this stuff I don't know about? You do. Lots of the stuff that we talk about as being kind of in-school factors, in inverted commas, are relationships and processes within schools, aren't they? It's things like labelling and subculture formation and all that stuff is relationships and processes.
Yeah, just to say at the same time.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So don't think, oh, is this something different? You do know about it, and you can link it to things like identity formation and things like that as well. So yeah. Okay.
And I just will say here at this point, sorry, just in case, if there is that moment, when you just open an exam, and I appreciate that's a long time ago for me, but when you open it, you're like, oh, goodness, read that. I mean, obviously for the 30 marker and obviously the 10 marker, there's going to be an item, and that will stimulate your memory around what it's asking you about. It's there for a reason. Obviously, yes, you can quote it for the 30 marker and you have to for the 10, but actually it will give you a sort of hint of where you're going, and that will be really helpful for you if you do get a word you think, oh, I'm not really sure what they meant by that. That will be there for you.
Okay, so we're going to move on to, we'll just have a little bit on technique-y type stuff, and then we'll move on to theory, methods, and methods in context. I just noticed quite a few people have been asking about postmodernism, and I was working on the assumption you were asking about it in terms of a theory question, which is where I'll pick it up. But just quickly, postmodernism in relation to education, if that's what you were asking, you could link it to globalization, you could link it to choice and diversity in education.
Meeting
to identity.
Meeting the needs of a global economy.
Yeah, so there are ways in which you could bring it in. Yeah, so but in terms of being asked a question directly on postmodernism, that's more likely to be as a theory question on paper one. Okay, right, let's have a quick look at some technique type ones. This is the one I always dread, because it's like, how long's a piece of string and how long's your paragraph, more importantly. How many paragraphs do you need to get in the top mark band for the 30 marker? I'm going to let you into a secret. No one's counting paragraphs. They're not. They don't count them. I've never counted how many paragraphs there were in an essay in my life. But I do think, is there breadth and depth? Okay, because your paragraphs might be much shorter than mine or much longer than mine, so I can't do it by a number of paragraphs. Sorry.
No, teachers will give you. Your teachers will have given you a guide for that, as a guide to how much you can reasonably write in 45 minutes, how much that they expect to see, because otherwise you could go away and do your homework and be lazy and just do one paragraph. So your teachers will probably have said to you a certain amount of paragraphs, because they're kind of trying to give you an idea of how long you should spend doing your essay, how much you could reasonably write in the time, but in terms of the mark scheme, it's not there. You have to think about, you want to do as much as you can. You basically want to be writing for about 45 minutes if you don't have extra time, and you want range and depth, and you just want to get as much in as you can, and that's all you can do.
We've had a couple of thumbs down since we started saying that we're not going to give you a number of paragraphs. Honestly, it will vary a little bit as well, because a range of, say, Marxist views on education might be different for a range of policies that have impacted on, so there isn't, I know you want a specific number, but there is one. And honestly, some people's paragraphs are a page, and if people's paragraphs are a page, they're not going to do 5 paragraphs, but if your paragraph's quite small, you might need at least that. So I'm not going to give you a number, because it depends what your paragraph's like.
It's not quantity, it's quality, isn't it? That's the
absolutely
key, that breadth and depth. And obviously, if you're doing longer paragraphs, there's the assumption that you're writing some sort of AO1, some AO2, and then you're doing a bit of
depth in there.
A sandwich, and then you've got to do some analysis, and you're doing sandwich evaluation, and that's very different from someone that may be doing shorter paragraphs, but are doing them sort of quite lean, and they're writing more sort of range. Obviously, what we want is both, really, and obviously, like Anna said, it's what you reasonably can write in that time, and obviously, what you don't want to do is run out of time, and that's the key. You don't want to think to yourself, oh, I won't answer, I don't know, your 10 marker at the end because I want to write another paragraph. That's silliness. You need to cover your next question, which would be your 10 marker.
Do you need an intro for any of the questions? You don't need an intro for your 4, 6, or 10 markers. Definitely not. Need is an interesting question for the other ones, because go with what your teachers told you for the 30 markers and 20 markers.
Yeah.
I tend to do an intro. It's not in the mark scheme that there has to be an intro. So if you can do the essay well without one.
Something meaningful, if you're going to write something meaningful that's going to get you marks, then it's a good thing to do, if you know what I mean. So I think, and maybe it's more important for some topics than others. So I always think if you're writing about differential achievement, like class, gender, ethnicity, it's a good place to explain what the differences in achievement are.
The broad overview or whatever, or define a key term.
And then you're showing your knowledge. Then you're showing your knowledge, and therefore you will start picking up marks. It's not like a redundant waste of time.
No, absolutely.
So I'd say if you're going to write one, make it count. If it's going to be a bit of pointless waffle, then maybe don't bother.
No.
Yeah.
Do you get capped if you don't evaluate? It depends on the question. There's no need for evaluation in your 4 and 6. You can get 10 out of 10 without evaluating on the apply and analyze 10 marker, actually, although I would recommend doing a bit of evaluation in that on the one with the item. But it does say analysis or evaluation, so it is possible to not do. There's no cap as such. The 30 marker, a big chunk of that mark is evaluation. So you do, for your 30 marker and your 20 marker, you do need to evaluate. So it's not a cap as such. It's not like you can't get beyond this amount. But they start talking about evaluation,
midway through.
Yeah, midway through the bands. And if you're not evaluating at all, you're not going to get past there. So it's not like a specific cap saying you can't get past 12 or something, but you wouldn't get much past 12 if you didn't evaluate at all.
And it's also the type of evaluation you're doing, aren't you?
Yes.
So if you're thinking about the 30 mark, if you're doing that juxtaposition evaluation where you're just making a sort of counter argument that isn't necessarily related, again, you're not moved that far up. You really want to be sticking tight to that point. So it goes back to that point we said earlier about how many paragraphs you're writing. It's what's in that paragraph that matters, really. Is it applied to that question? Is it strategic in what you're explaining?
Okay, just back on the number of paragraphs, because Charlie Buller has... No, I'm not encouraging people to do this, by the way, so don't pay to get us to answer your question, but once you have done, I don't feel like I can then not answer it. Give me a number for the number of paragraphs.
Don't.
Anna's saying 5, and I'm not going to disagree, but that isn't a hard and fast rule. Not as hard and fast rule. Just as a bit of a guidance, that's probably what I say as well. But it is just a bit of a guidance. Yeah. Okay.
That's what I think a lot of students realistically could do in 45 minutes. I wouldn't get stressed out trying to do any more than that. But equally, you could get full marks doing less. But that's what I normally tell them.
Moving on to oh gosh, sorry. We've got another one. I don't even know what you're asking. They're just saying thanks. Okay, thank you.
I think it's that sort of I think moving on to the 20 marker maybe.
Okay.
I think there's a little bit about pets.
There's a few little questions about methods in context popping up.
Millie, do you want to ask your question? Because you just paper forgot to ask anything. Put your question in, but please, we're not encouraging you to do that. So, but anyway, all right, yeah. Conclusions, just quickly, and then I do want to go to methods in context. What do we need to add in a conclusion? Do we just repeat points and summarise? Do you just repeat points and summarise it? No. To be honest, there's not much point doing that. I always think, you're such a short space of time that you've got, you want to be getting marks for everything you do. So yes, on one hand, you're just doing it. Well, you're not just doing it, but part of the reason you're doing it is that the mark scheme says appropriate conclusions will be drawn for the top band. But what is an appropriate conclusion? It's answering a question, isn't it? So try and say something, specific in the answer. Don't just say, in this essay, I've said this. Yeah. Because what you don't want to do is, in this essay, I'm going to say this, then say it, and then say, in this essay, I've said this, because you've only got so much time. So writing the essay 3 times probably doesn't help. Do we want to add anything on conclusions quickly?
Yeah, well, the most important thing is that you are linking back to the question and making a conclusion. So if it says, for example, evaluate the usefulness of something, in your conclusion, you need to conclude, is it useful or not? Is there something that could be more useful? Would it be more useful if something? It needs to have the wording of the question in there, and it needs to actually conclude. So I would avoid sitting on the fence. I mean, even if you don't fully believe what you're writing, I would, you need to actually kind of make a kind of commit to agreeing or disagreeing, like with the statement that you've been writing about, I think.
Okay, so got loads and loads of questions coming through. I'm just trying to keep
Yeah,
an
because
eye on
Margaret says,
them.
do you pick a side or have to be equal? No, pick a side, I would say.
There's
Yeah,
a quick question, and I'm going.
yeah, it is. It isn't a rule though. So sometimes there's a nice natural
Yeah.
midpoint you can use, but yeah, you don't want to just say some people say this, some people say that. You want to say something, say maybe like a nice bit of postmodernism. Maybe this is all, maybe this is all irrelevant or whatever. So something a little bit extra that's going to give you a couple of extra marks coming in the end. I'm
Or
sorry.
maybe, yeah, or something like maybe we can't conclude because maybe not enough research has been done,
Yes.
or the research is skewed in one direction, and a group's been neglected. Like with ethnicity, for example, not all groups have been researched equally, so maybe we can't conclude because we haven't got all the evidence for the whole picture, something like that.
Right. I'm really conscious of the time. We haven't done any theory and methods
Yeah,
yet.
and
So
then methods and context.
Yeah.
yeah, we've had
MIC.
one.
Okay, but I was about
We,
to, I would
we
have
have
to redirect it to that.
yeah, we have had one about do you have a do you have to include a sociologist in every paragraph? Again, it's not a rule, but the more try and make it sociological, so bring in some sociology. Is there good exact structure for paragraphs and stuff and conclusion? And is it better to evaluate in a separate paragraph, or is it okay in the same one? I actually think evaluating in your paragraph's a good thing because that's nice. It's likely to be more explicit, evaluate the specific point you've made. But sometimes you'll evaluate in a separate bit, and that's fine as well. So don't panic about it at all. Stop doing super chats. I'm sure Jim's happy about you doing the super chats, but don't. If you, yeah, okay. It's not a pay for questions situation. Okay, right. Methods in context.
A few people have been asking that question. That's what I was going to say. That's been coming up a lot. Yeah.
Okay. I'm going to answer the second bit first, just quickly, which is actually if you use a study, quite often that can send you off on a bit of a tangent. You're being asked about using that specific research method to research this specific topic. So if you it's unlike if you do know, and sometimes it has happened, you do know a study that used that method to research that topic, and you know some of the strengths and limitations on how they got around it and stuff, then that could be really good. And there was one a few years ago, field experiments and labelling, and it was Rosenthal and Jacobson really. And so if you what you don't want to do is describe that study because that's not answering the question. But if you know some of the issues or whatever, then that's fab. But if you start talking about a study that used that method to study something else, you're not putting it in context, so you're not likely to be getting a huge amount of credit for that. So no, you don't have to use a study. Focus on what you've been specifically asked. The PET one, I know some teachers suggest PET as a structure, and I don't want to say that's wrong. It was good, yeah. So it's not wrong. You don't have to. If other people aren't doing it, PET, don't worry that you're not doing it. Right? It's one way of doing it, and it's fine if you thinking, well, it's a way of remembering that there are different types of strengths and limitations in it, practical, ethical and theoretical. So if you remember it that way, that's great. But don't feel too bound by it. If you don't feel you have to shoehorn an ethical one in, if you haven't really got anything to say about that, it's fine to be PPT or PETT or whatever it might be. So it's a good way to remember strengths and limitations. It's a good way to revise it and learn it and remember them.
But it's not, it doesn't say in the mark scheme, there's no
have to be like
specific
that.
structure that they're looking for. So if you have done that, you haven't done that, don't worry. But it's not the structure like that. It's not a requirement. It's not what the mark scheme is actually grading you on, basically. It's just to help you. It's a framework to help you remember things and know what to put in the answer, not something you're actually assessed on.
Absolutely. Did anyone spotted any of the methods in context ones? The big thing with methods in context is always, and I saw how many paragraphs, I'm not answering it. It depends on your paragraph. But the big thing with methods in context is making sure that you're putting it in the context. So don't just think about strengths and limitations of the method, or just think about difficulties of studying that topic, or things about something like that. Try and bring them together as much as possible. Why might this method be good for studying this topic? That's the thing. And as long as you try and do that as often as possible through the essay, you're going to do all right with that. Don't worry too much about the structure with that one.
I was going to say another point. I think sometimes, from my experience, students sometimes think that the research is only students, for argument's sake, they're being studied, and then that limits how many sort of context questions you got to think outside the box. I mean, sometimes it might feel it could be teachers, it could be parents, it could be other stakeholders, and that will allow you to expand upon your your paragraphs a little bit more, have a bit more range in the context, because ultimately they might experience slightly different issues. Because sometimes you only think of, well, it only affects students two ways. Well, how am I going to write any more points? So just think outside. Will they be thinking about other groups of people? And in the same way, there was one a couple of years back, was about secondary data, I think, in schools. Again, a lot of your students would be thinking of visual statistics, but actually you think outside the box with that. Think, it could be, internal reports, it could be marked work, that sort of thing. So I would personally spend some time using that item. I think the item is really, really helpful for the methods in context, and I think you can really get that, the who, the what, the how, the context from those, and you can sort of do a little mind map around those. That sort of gives you a good starting point.
Okay, and I just want to wish Naz, Brando, Maz, Evie, and R good luck. That's great. I'm assuming this one is about the methods in context. What do you do for the conclusion in the methods in context one? I suggest having a little conclusion. Don't worry about it unduly. It's probably the only place in there where I might mention suggesting that maybe that would be better to use this other method. I think that's one place where you potentially could do that in the conclusion, or you could mention using it alongside another method in order to triangulate or something like that. A little bit like that, but just a sentence or two. Yeah, that's not the focus of your answer. Would you agree? Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah. Or? Exactly the same. I'd say exactly the same. Is it a useful method, yes or no, for studying that context? And if not, what else would be better?
Fab. Yeah. Okay. Moving on to
just one really quick one. Someone just kept asking about, could it be personal historical documents in methods
I have
in
seen
context?
that one. Oh yeah, I did see that one.
Yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, so documents, yes, it could. The documents did come up on the AS papers, but they did give you quite a broad range of documents to talk about. So it wasn't just one very little thing. So don't get too panicked about that. If it is documents of some kind, they will make sure there's enough for you to write about. So there might be some personal documents and some historical documents together, for example, or different types of documents. So it could be there, but don't panic that it's going to be something really niche that you won't know what to write. They'll make it so there's enough stuff to write about.
Yeah, and there will be hints in the item, won't there? And there's you always have a bigger item for methods in context than any of the other questions. There will be some stuff in there.
A long item.
Yeah, so it will mention some of the types of documents that you might want to talk about in the item, so that helps a little bit then as well. And again, often, although you don't need a study, and as I was saying, there's good reason not to include a study. Often they base it vaguely around a study that has happened in the past. So using concepts to look at parent choice in education or something like that was Gewurtz, who we mentioned earlier, wasn't it? So they might hint at that in the item or talk about that sort of that's what they did or what the problems were, and that just helps, doesn't it, with you managing what you're wanting to do. Gosh, there's lots and lots going on here. I hope I can keep it.
Lots of requests for action theories for the 10 marker.
Yeah. What was the question that I put on before and I took off? It was about the 10 markers, wasn't it? Anyway, there were lots of questions about the 10 marker at the end. Actually, the main one, and I haven't found it now, so I'll just talk about it in broad terms, and it relates to this, is could this sort of thing come up as your 10 marker at the end of paper 1? And yes, it could. So it's not just a methods question. It might be. So it might be something like 2 criticisms of questionnaires or something. It might be something like that. But it could be theory, or it could be theory and methods coming together. Someone asked whether it could be sociology as a science and things like that. Yeah, that can come up in this sort of question. Value freedom. We had this was the paper last year where we had the one about feminism and research design, wasn't it? Which caused the meltdown on Twitter later in the day. So it could be about theory, it could be about research design. So yes, social action theory could come up. But remember, with a 10 marker for this paper, you're only going to be asked for 2 of something, aren't you? So it might be 2 criticisms, 2 strengths, 2 ways.
2 ideas.
Yeah. And so, it's not like when, obviously on paper 3 you could get a 20 marker on some of these things where you need to bring in rather more, have a broader approach. You just need to be able to think of 2 arguments on one side of a debate for these. And actually, that's another point, because someone else asked, and I can't remember it was, how do you answer these questions? This is one where you don't evaluate. Okay, So with that 10 marker at the end, the last question on it, you won't get any credit for particularly like a counter argument. You won't. So if you're asked for strengths of questionnaires, don't bother telling me why they might not be very good, because you're just going to get credited for the explanation of the strength and maybe illustrating with the point and stuff. Sometimes half students' answers are like the opposite of what they've been asked for, which I can understand why, because you're kind of evaluating it. But with that last 10 marker, the one without an item, just focus on explaining the point you're making, analysing that point. Maybe illustrate it with an example if you've got one. Yeah, that kind of thing. That's your focus, and focus it around precisely what they've asked for. The way of this, or the strength of this, or the criticism of this. Focus it around that. Explain it. Why is it a criticism? Why is that bad? Here's an example of that doing it. Yeah, rather than however, some people like it or whatever, because that's going off on a tangent. Yeah.
There's just there's a little bit of confusion there just with this action theory thing, just about semantics. People asking, is it interactionism the same as symbolic interactionism? Is it the same as social action theories? Yeah, social action theory is like a broad umbrella term for those theories, like symbolic interactionism. So some people just refer to it as interactionist theory, some people refer to it as action theories, but it's all those same kind of things like Mead, Cooley, Goffman, Becker, those studies, it all comes under that umbrella, but it means the same thing. Some teachers will call it interactionism, some teachers will call it action theories.
It's all your micro sociology, isn't it? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, labelling theory as well would come under there as well.
Yeah,
so.
So there's lots you can talk.
Faber comes under there now.
Yeah, strictly speaking. Yeah, so there's lots you can include in that. Absolutely, lots you can include in that. Lots of people have been asking about research design, because I mentioned it. Can you get research design as a 10 marker? Yes, because we did last time. It would be some particular thing about research design, and I suppose the important point is, what does that include? Yeah, if they use the term research design in the question again, which they did last year, and I think it was the first time they had, but it is on the spec as research design.
Yeah.
What are they? What kind of thing are they talking about under the umbrella term of research design?
So I would say choice of topic, choice of method, choice of sample. But I'd probably say topic and method are the easiest
topic
ones.
And method are the main ones, aren't they?
To talk about.
And again,
and the easiest to talk about.
Yeah, and you only need to give two things, aren't you? So that could be your choice of method, choice of topic.
Why the sociologist has carried out the method they have and the topic they have. Basically, it's almost like a practical question, really. It's like, why have you chosen to do what you've done? That's what research I meant. You might talk about sample as well, though there won't be an explicit sampling.
Oh, there was someone asked about sampling before. It's the sort of thing you can bring in, absolutely, So you can bring it into research design, you can bring it into methods and context. People very rarely do, but you can think about, well, how would it be easy to get a sample? How would you get your sample and all that kind of thing? You bring that in there as well. But yeah,
there's always this question. I need to bring this, because I know this is a thing that comes up every year, and it's Tilly Alexander about feminology, and I think we need to clarify.
I do not want to panic anyone about phenomenology and ethnomethodology. You could bring it into a social action question, but you don't have to. Okay,
Yeah.
if you know it, it's great. Get loads of credit for it. But there's other stuff. If you talk about other social action stuff instead of that, you will get your credit for that. So do not panic about that. Yeah,
it comes up at every point of this year, and I think it must just do its rounds, and people panic. And I think, like anything in sociology, a lot of it is supplementary in the sense that we have stuff that some teachers teach and other teachers don't teach. We might mention some concepts and names here that you haven't used. It's okay, and that's what it's about. There isn't the spec in sociology is very loose and broad on purpose. So the knowledge you have tonight is enough. Okay, so you don't need to be going and reading more stuff.
No,
fine.
No, don't. I think I've sort of answered this, but just in terms of a structure, how do you structure the 10 mark outline and explain if you're not evaluating? Because aren't you going to end up writing not enough? So still make your point. So that point, explain that point. So PE, and then I'm going for another E, but it's not evaluation, it's example or illustration or something like that. And and then your analysis will come largely through that detailed explanation, but you can bring in a little bit of nuance, but not a counter argument. But if you're saying, a strength of questionnaires is, I don't know, you might want
If
to
you,
say to what
I,
extent you
if
can sort of bring
To
in a
what
little
Yeah,
bit.
well, if you say the
Yeah,
strength of questionnaires is that they're like highly representative, for example, you can send them to a large sample. You can bring
yeah,
in nuance, for example, like some studies may be more representative. Like, say, for example, government surveys have got more
yeah,
money, therefore they might
yeah,
have more representatives than others,
yeah,
or still not all groups are included. Nothing is going
yeah,
to be completely 100%
yeah,
representative because the homeless
yeah,
or people in
yeah,
prisons won't be included. Just a
yeah.
tiny little
So you bring that
caveat rather
bit
than a
of yes.
criticism.
Don't go for a counter
Yeah.
argument, but
I
the
would
extent to
say
which is
roughly
one you can go
is,
for.
yeah, I think sort of 80% it's about, or 90, even 90% is your chains of analysis. That's the thing. It's like that boom, boom, boom,
Totally.
boom, boom.
Yeah.
It's the think of stepping stones. And then maybe one sentence to what extent, and even use that language so that you sort of really signposting it. But yeah, it's about those chains of analysis, because sometimes you stop at a point, but is there anything else you can explain? Imagine the examiner doesn't know what well, they don't know you know it, so that you need to tell them you know it, and that's your
Yeah.
opportunity to show off what you know.
Now, I did say we were going to stop directly at 6 o'clock, which is 2 minutes away, but we've had a few people asking about value freedom, so maybe that could be our last question. Sorry if you've asked a question and I've not got around to it. We've got through a lot. We've covered a lot of stuff, so I hope we've got it. If you missed some of the answers earlier and some of the discussion earlier, this will be available to watch again later. So quite a few people have asked about value freedom, which could come up potentially as a 10 marker, could be. So two reasons why sociology should be value free, why it might not be value free, why it shouldn't be. It's going to be two things on one side of a debate. Remember, that's what if you get a theory type debates type question on this, that's what it will be. So value freedom, it's about. Sorry, one of you two answer. I'm nuttering. What can we, just as a brief summary of what sort of thing they could talk about in value freedom?
Katie,
I
do you
mean,
want to go?
yeah, I was
Katie,
going to
go
say,
for it.
like, yeah, go for it. Value free. I mean, I feel bad because I feel like I talk about this a lot with my students, and they were like, "Oh God, here she goes again about value free." The way that which the methodology itself can be value free. So, for example, it can be peer reviewed, so that it keeps the research scientific. It's the way that you might use quantitative methods to stop your biases coming in. It's about how you would have used words like positivism and like obviously quantitative methods. Is about how that sociologist ensures that the method doesn't allow their subjectivity to come in. So it'd be explaining that, really. So there'd be multiple ways in which that can be done. So for example, it could be, particularly official statistics is a really good way of keeping, you're just dealing with the numbers, you're keeping detached in that way, that you're not putting your values, your biases in.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. And it links with things like the sociology of science debate and all that kind of thing. They're all, and positivism, interpretivism, all that. They're all linked, aren't they? Totally. So, some stuff that you'll be able to include. Yeah, so do not be doing any panicking. I suggest.
Top tips.
Should we finish with a couple of top tips? Yeah, and then we'll do. I was just going to say, one of my tips is probably not to spend all night doing sociology and revising and stuff, and make sure you get a good night's sleep and a bit of chill out time. But yeah, what else could we have top tips?
My top tip is to make sure you answer a bit of every single question. So even if you're running out of time, you're going to potentially pick up more marks by having started every question, by spending ages perfecting and polishing your 30, but then missing out your whole 10 marker. So if you think you're running out of time, leave whatever you're doing where it is and try to start the last question or the next whatever questions. So you've done a bit of everything. That is a way to try probably get more marks in the bag, I'd say.
Yeah.
That's my top tip for the day.
Yeah, that's a fantastic top tip. You got a top tip, Katie?
I always think like it's worth, particularly for the essays, is planning, like just jotting it down on your paper, just because otherwise it can feel a bit, just, oh, here's everything I know about that question. And obviously if you want to get those top marks, it's being strategic. So planning really helps, because you can sort of organise your thoughts and have it in a structured way. Obviously you're going to be a bit nervous, so it gives you want to maximise your time, but that sort of couple of minutes planning, it can really sort of pay off in the long run.
Yeah. And quite a lot of other questions which we haven't got time to answer. We've done lots of things before about methods in context, about different globalization. There are videos out there. Craig, who wasn't able to be with us today, has done some question walkthroughs. If you want to go onto the YouTube channel and find a question walkthrough through a globalization question, an education policy question, a methods in context question, lots of them on there. So I don't suggest you spend all night watching YouTube videos, but if you want to watch a couple of them, if there's some specific thing you want to find out a bit more about, I'd do that. A couple of people asking how we're going to manage doing a paper 2 one of these with all the different optional topics. We'll find a way. We will keep an eye out on the videos that are coming. We'll do stuff for some of the less popular options, but we'll probably focus on the more popular options for the kind of the big video, if that's okay. Thank you very much, Anna and Katie. Lots of fantastic questions from people, weren't there? And really good to hear from everyone. And we will see you very soon for some paper 2 stuff. But very, very good luck tomorrow. And
good luck, guys.
Yeah, and
Hope
hope you like the paper. Okay, guys. Cheers. Bye.
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 Bye.